sąsiady biją się już 3 dekady. Siekiera, motyka, guma, ość. Mam już tego pięknie dość. Siekiera, motyka, rot ma żadna nie odbiera. Święta panna, siekiera, motyka, bęben róg. Wyparł się nas wszystek Bóg. Goring sobie pije sznapsa, Polak wciąż dostaje klapsa. Złupić tu już nie ma co. Chodź pan z nami dziś na dno.
Before we begin this review, I am legally, well not really, but maybe morally, obliged to tell you that I've received the key for this game for free from the great developers at Polyamorous and the great publishers at All-In Games. Thanks for the key, guys. Without the game review wouldn't be possible. That sounded better in my head. When it comes to video games, you'd think children would be more inclined to play gameplay-focused, fun, colorful games like Mario and such, and the adults would be more focused on narrative experience, deep stories, deep characters. They would enjoy some good gameplay attached to it, but they would like darker, more mature themes. And with the recent introduction to the industry, or maybe not so recent, damn time flies fast, of walking simulators, you'd imagine a walking simulator would be strictly for a more mature audience, while children play more gameplay focused games, but actually the opposite kind of happened with me, in which today as an adult I really enjoy Mario and Kirby and all of those games that I didn't really play too much of in my childhood, while in my childhood I would love story focused games and experimental games and such. And I think part of that is simply because those games were rarer in the old days, and when they came out they were very experimental and they were very different. They tried to implement gameplay features into the story, or they rarely, if ever, didn't have any gameplay with the story, but there were a few examples that didn't have any gameplay even though they were mostly locked in Japan. I'm talking about games like Tulip and Romania, those very experimental sort of games for the time, and I don't know why I enjoy gameplay and talk more about the gameplay than the story and the atmosphere and such in more recent titles, why I became such a gameplay guy, especially since I enjoyed those kind of story-focused games so much during my childhood. But if I were to take a guess, I would go back to the time in which Gone Home came out and Firewatch came out after that. Those two games were very disappointing to me for reasons that I won't elaborate right now, but basically they single-handedly or double-handedly, since it's two games technically, well, they killed my enthusiasm for this kind of game. And since then, I've been trying them out and I've been playing some of them and I've been enjoying some of them, but I've been mostly focused on gameplay. My priorities completely changed after those two games, completely shattered my hopes for the walking simulator. Well, maybe not that bad since I've still been playing them, but what I can say, however, is that if you were similarly disappointed with those games but still want to give a go into a story-focused game with very light puzzle elements that's mostly focused on a narrative that tries and I think accomplishes being really dark and mature, well then look no further than Paradise Lost. The story goes like this. World War II didn't end. Well, it might have ended later in our current perspective, but on the perspective of the characters who are in the 60s, they aren't sure if the war ever ended. The reason for that is because they are in Poland and the Germans quickly developed atomic weapons and basically nuked the entirety of Poland into one giant frozen wasteland. So people living there have no way of knowing if the war is really over or not outside of there. The story follows a young protagonist, a young boy, who leaves his small shelter in search of something which I won't spoil. And he ends up right in front of the entrance to a gigantic, enormous, city-sized, or well, maybe more like state-sized, it is big, okay, bunker, which was constructed by the Nazis. So yeah, if you want to know what this game feels like, it's basically BioShock, but Nazi instead of objectivism. Oh, also no combat. It is very much a story-focused game. Here, story progress gets rewarded with more story and more progress. You walk through the bunker and you will see all these notes, and if you don't like reading, well, you're out of luck, because a lot of the story is told through these notes. And eventually, the young protagonist will also get to interact with a girl who's on the other side of an intercom system. She essentially gets to speak through the speakers, and occasionally, if you find an intercom, you can have like two-way communication, which has some very basic choose your options of dialogue, but there's usually only 2 or 3, and they don't really matter in the great scheme of things. But yeah, the young protagonist is trying to get deeper into the bunker for his own motives, and the girl is trying to get him deeper into the bunker because she's stuck in a control room deep into the bunker, and the bunker is completely abandoned, so she wants him to save her. It's a simple setup that doesn't really tell you how much fucked up things are going to get, which they are going to get fucked up because, well, it's a fucking Nazi bunker. What did you expect? Happy things don't happen in places like these. And I really want to praise this game's writing, the way it was structured. I really like that at the very beginning of the game, in the very opening, you get a lighter and then you light it up to see in the dark, and you immediately get a flashback. I was worried that I would constantly get these flashbacks and that they would slowly tell a story that I already knew how was going to end, the backstory for our protagonist and why he's in the bunker, and that it would be very slowly drip-fed throughout the game, even though we would already know how that was going to end, which would make it instead very, very boring. But to my surprise, no. The flashbacks come and go incredibly fast. They are basically over. Okay, I'm not gonna say they are completely over, I don't want to spoil anything, but you already seen 90% of the flashbacks at the end of the first chapter, and you already have seen the entire backstory of the protagonist and know of his motivations. It's amazing how fast it is and how snappy it is, because other games, other walking simulators, other story-focused games might want to drag out the storyline forever, but the developers knew. They knew that the backstory was important, but they knew that the backstory wasn't everything that the game has to offer. It didn't have to be everything, and they didn't need to be, think that the audience is dumb and that they're not going to figure out what's going to happen. No, the backstory is necessary, but it is not the most interesting part of the game. So let's get rid of it right at the beginning. Let's go through it and show what the protagonist is before we introduce the plot points that are actually going to be relevant to the current plot, instead of just the backstory of the characters, and I really appreciate that. There is a sort of backstory that is slowly drip-fed through computer stations as you find them, that slowly tell you of what happened within the bunker. Of course, there's also the notes and the environmental storytelling, but the big plot beats are all told through these computer screens. The game practically teaches you to sort of be curious about them, but fear them, because nothing really good comes out of those computer screens, like of knowing about them. At one point you can even skip one of them if you had enough with the tragedy, but at the same time, when you reach one, there is a sense of excitement because it's another big piece of the puzzle that will really tell you what happened in this bunker and why it is completely empty. And another thing that I really like, not that it's that uncommon in these walking simulators, is the implication of events rather than the showing of them. They had the perfect opportunity to show what is happening with the computers and the cameras, and I don't know if they did that because of budgetary restraints or it was an artistic decision, but I think they made the right decision to not show what happened through the cameras, through the PCs, and instead just have us look at these sort of bird's eye view maps of the bunker, displaying where the people are to show us what is going on and just imply what is happening. Well, to be fair, the notes and the screens and such, they do imply, but they leave very little to the imagination. They don't outright show it, but it's pretty obvious what's going on. And that just makes things worse, because you know what happened. There is very little room for interpretation, but that little room for interpretation, that little gap that makes your brain fill in what is going on, is just, it can create some very dark stuff in your head. It can give you some very dark thoughts, and that's why I don't recommend this game if you have a problem with having dark thoughts, because it does deal with some pretty heavy stuff. It does deal with some pretty mature themes, some very violent, some very dark stuff. And when you deal with some of the topics of this game, it's very easy to mess up and end up with a bunch of unfortunate implications, or feel tone deaf and offensive. And the way the developers did this by implication instead of showing, it's almost like a cheat because they didn't really have to deal with the messy stuff actually happening on screen and how you were supposed to portray that. But you know what? I'll allow that. In this case, I'm glad that they delivered a good product, even if they had to cheat a little bit. And what is writing if not cheating your way around to create a very enjoyable experience? And yeah, this is enjoyable, not in the traditional sense of enjoyable, but I had a good time with this plot. Not everything is perfect though, and there are a couple of things that can sour the experience. The first one that I want to talk about, and the main one, is the voice acting. The voice actors are okay. They were working on an indie budget with voice acting as well. I know this game doesn't look very like how you imagine classic indie games to look. I mean, look at this, it's gorgeous. But it is still an indie game, and they had to go cheap somewhere to compensate for everything, and I think they did that with the voice acting. Though honestly, maybe they did get professional voice actors and just didn't give them the right script. I'm not sure what level of professionals the voice actors are. Okay? But the voice actor for the main character is very, very not good. I don't want to say he's outright bad. I don't know if he's like a child actor since the main character is a boy, but his voice acting is just unconvincing. I'm not convinced he's angry when he's angry, and I'm not convinced he's screaming for his life in the few moments he's in danger. And I just don't buy any of his emotions when he's talking. He's way too subdued for that. And the girl who speaks about on the intercom, she also has a problem with tone. Sometimes I can't figure out what she's supposed to be feeling, what is she supposed to be bringing to the table on the scene. But they hide a little bit on her because there is some static, some clacking, some noise when she speaks, since you only hear that through old broken 1950s speakers basically. But her voice acting is not perfect either, and sometimes I'm just not convinced that these people are having this conversation with this level of how serious things are getting, and they just don't convince me of their emotions. There are two other voice actors that play a very large role in the story, and I think they did a way better job than these characters, which just serves to highlight how bad the characters we are supposed to be attached to for the main part of our journey are voiced, and that can really make things feel not good. Like I said, not downright bad, but definitely not as good as I wanted them to be. The major problem is that when they speak and you're not convinced, it can really break your immersion, and this game is all about immersing yourself in this alternate history world. There are quite a few moments in which you just explore and read notes in silence, and I found those to be a lot more creepy and immersive as you are just alone trying to piece together this giant puzzle that is the plot. But it is what it is. The voice acting is not the greatest. Now, the second point is that in spite of the game knowing that the background of the main character is important but not the most interesting part and not wanting to drip feed that throughout the game, in spite of me praising that, I also have to say that the final twist of the game is incredibly obvious. They just keep hitting at it, and I'm not sure if it was meant or not meant to be obvious, because at some point it's just so in your face. They literally draw a freaking diagram of what is happening that leaves no other room for interpretation, and you already know how this game is going to end. You already know what the final twist is going to be. And you can know that as soon as like the second chapter out of 5 chapters, though technically it is more like 4 chapters and one final climatic moment. But yeah, it takes a long time to get to the point where the twist happens, even though you already knew that it was going to happen for a long time. And that is a bit disappointing. I'm not sure, maybe considering how obvious it is, maybe they wanted you. And at the end, when the characters themselves realize what the twist is, they have sort of this emotional confrontation that leads right into the deepest parts of the plot and how it relates to the characters we are playing and talking and seeing. And it is a very satisfying finale. I can definitely say that. It's just a shame that you can see it coming for a mile away and oh, there it is, it's coming, but it comes at a snail's pace. So you already know what's going to happen. You're just like, oh, come on, when is this car crash going to happen? But I can definitely say that at least when it happens, it is a very satisfying car crash. And I didn't think I would be saying this sentence right now. It is a very satisfying ending, nonetheless. It's definitely a lot like the ending of the games I mentioned at the beginning of this review. So if you were disappointed by them, maybe you'll like this one. But enough about the story and the writing. Let's talk about my thing. Let's talk about gameplay. So how do you play this game? Well, you don't do much. You can just press the keys so you can walk the world's slowest walk, or you can hold shift on a keyboard so you can run the world's slowest runs. Yeah, this game is really slow. It's a slow burn, not just story-wise, but movement-wise. Luckily for us, there is rarely a moment where you need to walk a long distance with nothing to look at. Like a lot of games try to be very dramatic and include very slow walks to uninteresting places, and while 90% of this game is slowly walking from place to place, the places you go to are very interesting. There is rarely ever a part where you just have to go straight forward and it takes a long time. That's what I'm trying to say. There's always a corner and a bunch of notes and desks for you to explore and such. And because of that, even though the walking speed is very slow, I rarely ever felt bored. Of course, you do have to interact with the environment to open doors and pull levers and switches, and I'm not sure how they did that on consoles, but on the computer, they did a very interesting choice, and that choice is that everything is controlled solely with the mouse, except for walking, of course, but with the exception of walking, everything is controlled with the mouse. You press a button, and you hold your mouse, and you go up, down, left, right, depending on what the screen tells you, to pull levers, to push switches. And whenever you get an option to push one from multiple switches, you can see the main character's hand, and you can use the mouse to go up, down, left, right, whatever is necessary, and click in order for you to choose that switch. Everything is controlled with the mouse. Even the dialogues, you get to choose what option the protagonist will say using the mouse wheel, and my mouse wheel is busted. So yeah, I had some trouble with that, especially on the dialogues where you have to choose very fast or they just completely disappear from the screen, because some dialogues are time limited, though unfortunately the game never really tells you which ones are time limited or not. But oh well, it's not the fault of the developers that my mouse wheel is busted. It's just I like when games give you alternate control schemes in case one of your keys or controllers or whatever is busted but you're using them anyway because you're too lazy and or / poor to buy another one. But yeah, this game doesn't really get that. On that note, this game has subtitles and you can't switch them on or off, which is odd. I like subtitles, I usually use them, but it's really odd that for the people who want maximum immersion, there I found no option in the options menu. Maybe I'm blind to turn off subtitles, so you're just gonna have to deal with subtitles if you buy this game. Oh, and yeah, and sometimes there's puzzles that require items. There's a very basic inventory system in the game where you can pick up things and they automatically show up on the lower left corner of the screen that you pick them up, but you usually use them in the very same area. Actually, I don't think there's a single exception for that. You just pick them up and you use them up in the same area and you just move forward and you have no inventory. So they're just very basic puzzles that just serve to hold you back for 30 seconds or so, or to encourage you to do some non-linear exploration so you can find some notes and learn more about the history of the bunker and stuff like that. But yeah, the gameplay of this game is very simple, and the entire game is structured so there are little side areas sometimes, but they are very minimal, and you're mostly supposed to go straight ahead. Just straightforward, just keep going. It is a very linear game. What this game does exceed though is in its world building, its atmosphere, its, let's call it set design. It's just amazing. When you first enter the bunker, it is this very dark, very cold place that is just filled with these little corners, and it's very claustrophobic. But eventually you come across the sort of train yard, and it's very obvious that you just took a side entrance into it and that the main entrance was through these trains, and you think, whoa, that's big. I thought, whoa, that's big. But then you keep going deeper and deeper until finally you take an elevator into the bunker proper, and oh my god, when I first got down through that elevator, I was just in awe. It is just enormous, it is gigantic, it is so grandiose, and this game just keeps hitting you with these moments. There is not a single moment in which you are just going to be locked in a room or a bunch of tight corridors for the rest of the game. No, they always keep throwing you in your face these grandiose monuments, this amazing architecture, these beautiful beaches, yes, underground beaches. They just keep hitting you over and over again that this place was supposed to be paradise for the people who constructed it. But the people who constructed it were not very good people. And the people that take it from them eventually are not very good people either. And as you go through the history of this bunker, you see this sort of paradise that is just completely wrecked because humanity, basically. So yeah, it kind of reminds me of Rapture. But it's not just about how beautiful it is, it's about how detailed it is, about how great the graphics are, especially for an indie game made by a small studio, about details and assets, visual assets that only get used once in a very specific place and never again, and it just makes you go, whoa. And even when you see the same asset again, you just go, wow, it makes sense that two cabinets from the same bunker would look very similar. But the point is, it's just very detailed and rich and makes it feel like this place has been lived in. And it also is very, very creepy with quite a few unsettling details. Before you know how the cameras actually work and who's operating them, you can already see them following you, showing you on screens. It's a very, very creepy moment. But later on, there's a much more subdued and somehow even creepier moment where you're crossing a bridge that has been completely destroyed because of war. And it has these automated turrets in it that at this point you've already killed a bunch of people. And this is not a game with death in it. It's not a combat game. It's not a stealth game. There are no monsters. It's not really a horror game. So technically it is a game about the horror of wars, so it might as well be. But that nothing is going to happen to you. And yet, crossing this bridge is the creepiest thing ever because one of the turrets is just going completely haywire and crazy, and the other just slowly, silently follows you as you walk through the bridge. It just keeps pointing at you. And I was creeped out. I was really tense. I was like, there's absolutely no way they're just going to fire at me, right? If they fire at me, it's going to be a scripted story moment. My head just kept running a million thoughts at the same time, and I just couldn't concentrate because of how tense that moment was. And in my opinion, that just shows an expert level of understanding game psychology, which is a field of study I just made up. But seriously, I can't believe the developers pulled that off. I knew I wasn't going to die. I knew if something happened, given how linear the game is, it was probably going to be scripted. I feared for the life of the main character anyway. It is that kind of nagging feeling that just is not logical at all, but keeps eating at the back of your brain. Like if you go to a minefield that doesn't exist anymore, people are like, oh yeah, there were mines here like 20 years ago, but we cleared them all and they're all busted anyway, so there's absolutely no chance you're going to die. And for the past 20 years, nobody died there. There's absolutely 0.0000001 chance of something going actually wrong. But would you still go through that minefield? Would you still go through that place that once was a minefield? I mean, if you have to go to work, if you live there, maybe, but holy shit, I wouldn't take a travel ticket to go there. My brain just does not like that. And this game took advantage of that, so congratulations to the devs. Unfortunately, that high level of quality craftsmanship doesn't extend to the entirety of the game. I found out that the closer I got to the end, the bigger the bugs got and the weirder they got as well. As I was walking through the third chapter, I noticed that they had this sort of objects that made for a fence, is that the name of the thing? Near a ledge, so it wouldn't fall off. And the fence was just objects stuck together into each other, which it's fine, it's a normal game design technique, so you can just stuck different pieces in a way that feels seamlessly or such, but they weren't stuck together properly, so one was sort of clipping on top of the other, and I found these sort of little graphical glitches throughout the game as I was going forward. But the big one is near the very end of the game, when my character just suddenly started floating. He just got up some stairs, but the game didn't register that he was going down the stairs, so he just kept floating. And that essentially softlocked me and kept me from finishing the game. I actually had to restart the game and then carefully walk up every single step of the stair. And then there is another small stair that I need to go down through, and I need to carefully go down through it and make sure that I was going step by step and then skip any and didn't do anything and didn't run and didn't do anything. It's strange. And once I followed the steps very, very slowly, I was able to break this soft lock and go through the final chapter of the game. But it was it's such a weird bug, and I didn't do anything special. I didn't like run into a corner or try to hit a corner at an odd angle or try to go up a table or somewhere I shouldn't have gone up to. No, I was just playing through the game normally, through the story normally, and yet the game just soft locked me at this point. Well, thankfully there was a solution, and it was just up to restarting the game because just loading the checkpoint didn't help. I was still ended up floating. So if this happens to you, yeah, try doing this. And it's a bit of a shame that this happened right close to the end of the game, which I played in pretty much one sitting because of how immersed I was. And it sort of leaves a sour feeling, but I already reported the bug to the devs. Another thing that's very weird, this game has multiple endings depending on your choices during the final chapter, but once you complete the game just erases your save and there is no way for you to reload to that point, and there is no chapter selection. That's right, this game is divided into 5 chapters, but there's like absolutely no chapter selection. And I thought this was like intentionally designed by the developers to be this way, so that you would have to live with the choices you've made, and so that it wouldn't be easy for you to go to this trip again. This was a one-way trip to this really immersive place. But on the Steam page, when someone complained about that, they were like, oh yeah, thanks for the complaint, we are looking into that. So apparently having no chapter selection screen and completely deleting your save upon reaching the end of the game was not an artistic choice. It was a developer oversight. And how? That's just such a weird thing to oversight. The bottom line is, this game is really good. It looks great, the writing is fantastic, but a few issues like voice acting and bugs bring it down from being a true masterpiece. Beyond the bugs I mentioned, there are a few other people on the Steam forum mentioning other bugs, so I think overall this game needs a little bit more polish, and there's no going around the game's length. You know how I feel about length by now. I think a game should be as long as it should be. If it needs to be short, it should be short. A game shouldn't extend itself with useless stuff, and this game overall, I really enjoyed it, and it clocked at around 4 hours. But if you think 4 hours is not enough buck for your dollar, then maybe wait for a sale, and by that time, the game will be polished. But still, while this game isn't gameplay focused, and I wouldn't recommend it for gameplay focused folks, I do think it builds an interesting world with these amazing characters and the drama surrounding them, and I do think it's a trip worth taking if you can forgive some of the indie roughness around it. Overall, recommended. This is Penguin Overdrive telling you to subscribe and comment and doing all of that, and thank you for reaching the end of the video. You know, just pretend I said the usual YouTuber stuff here. Okay? Okay, alright, see you guys next time.